Morning. All right, guys. So today we're going to read a story called Half a Day by Naguib Mahfouz. And as we read today, I want us to think about a lot of the same elements that we thought about when we read the story A Worn Path this past week and the week before. We read it really in depth and we looked at symbolism, metaphors, similes, allegorical elements. Remember that the path that Phoenix traveled on in that story was really an allegory for life, for her life and life in general. So what I want us to think about today is also I want us to think about the title of the text we're reading today, Half a Day. There is significance in the title of this story. There's meaning behind it. And as you read it, I want you to be thinking about what that significance really is. There are going to be moments where the author is going to talk about different things that are literally applicable to the story, but also have secondary meanings to them that are metaphors or similes, symbolism. Perhaps there are some elements of allegory in here as well. So I want you to be thinking about that. And the final thing I want you to consider is theme. So we haven't really spent a lot of time this year talking about theme, but we're going to with this text. So theme is essentially the underlying message that an author wants readers to learn or experience through their story or the characters in their story. So these messages are typically about life, society, humanity, ourselves. Themes are why we read. So something I want you to think about is, what is this author saying through this narrator's story? What does the narrator learn about life? What does the narrator learn about himself in the story? What did you maybe take away from the story yourself after reading it? It's really a beautiful story. It's short and sweet. So we will begin. Okay. Half a Day by Naguib Mahfouz. I walked alongside my father, clutching his right hand. All my clothes were new. The black shoes, the green school uniform, and the red cap. They did not make me happy, however, as this was the day I was to be thrown into school for the first time. My mother stood at the window watching our progress, and I turned towards her from time to time, hoping she would help. We walked along a street lined with gardens and fields planted with crops, pears, and date palms. Why school? I asked my father. What have I done? I'm not punishing you, he said, laughing. School's not a punishment. It's a place that makes useful men out of boys. Don't you want to be useful like your brothers? I was not convinced. I did not believe that there was really any good to be had in tearing me away from my home and throwing me into a huge, high-walled building. When we arrived at the gate, we could see the courtyard, vast and full of boys and girls. Go in by yourself, said my father, and join them. Put a smile on your face and be a good example to others. I hesitated and clung to his hand, but he gently pushed me from him. Be a man, he said. Today, you truly begin life. You'll find me waiting for you when it's time to leave. I took a few steps. Then the faces of the boys and girls came into view. I did not know a single one of them, and none of them knew me. I felt I was a stranger who had lost his way. But then some boys began to glance at me in curiosity, and one of them came over and asked, Who brought you? My father, I whispered. My father's dead, he said simply. I did not know what to say. The gate was now closed. Some of the children burst into tears. The bell rang. A lady came along, followed by a group of men. The men began sorting us into ranks. We were formed into an intricate pattern in the great courtyard, surrounded by high buildings. From each floor, we were overlooked by a long balcony roofed in wood. This is your new home, said the woman. There are mothers and fathers here, too. Everything that is enjoyable and beneficial is here. So dry your tears and face life joyfully. Well, it seemed that my misgivings had had no basis. From the first moments, I made many friends and fell in love with many girls. I had never imagined school would have this rich variety of experiences. We played all sorts of games. In the music room, we sang our first songs. We also had our first introduction to language. We saw a globe of the earth which revolved and showed the various continents and countries. We started learning numbers, and we were told the story of the creator of the universe. We ate delicious food, took a little nap, and woke up to go on with friendship and love, playing and learning. Our path, however, was not totally sweet and unclouded. We had to be observant and patient. It was not all a matter of playing and fooling around. Rivalries could bring about pain and hatred or give rise to fighting. And while the lady would sometimes smile, she would often yell and scold. Even more frequently, she would resort to physical punishment. In addition, the time for changing one's mind was over and gone, and there was no question of ever returning to the paradise of home. Nothing lay ahead of us but exertion, struggle, and perseverance. Those who were able took advantage of the opportunities for success and happiness that presented themselves. The bell rang, announcing the passing of the day and the end of work. The children rushed towards the gate, which was opened again. I said goodbye to friends and sweethearts and passed through the gate. I looked around but found no trace of my father, who had promised to be there. I stepped aside to wait. When I had waited for a long time in vain, I decided to return home on my own. I walked a few steps, then came to a startled halt. Good Lord! Where was the street lined with gardens? Where had it disappeared to? When did all the cars invade it? And when did all these people come to rest on the surface? How did these hills of rubbish find their way to cover the sides? And where were the fields that bordered it? High buildings had taken over. The street was full of children, and disturbing noises shook the air. Here and there stood conjurers, showing off their tricks, or making snakes appear and disappear from baskets. Then there was a band announcing the opening of a circus with clowns and weightlifters walking in front. Good Lord, I was in a daze. My head spun. I almost went crazy. How could all of this happen in half a day, between morning and sunset? I would find the answer at home with my father, but where was my home? I hurried towards the crossroads, but because I remembered that I had to cross the street to reach our house, but the stream of cars would not let up. Extremely irritated, I wondered when I would be able to cross. I stood there a long time until the young boy employed at the ironing shop on the corner came up to me. He stretched out his arm and said, "Grandpa, let me take you across." So this story has a lot of elements of, the story that we read last week, A Worn Path, where things aren't necessarily what they seem that are happening in the story, but we can also take them to be somewhat real. So what I want you to do is I want you to go ahead and begin today's work and, of course, consider the things that we talked about, right? I want you to think about the bigger elements of the story. What is the real message here? And what does everything represent? I'm thinking about the gate. What does the gate potentially represent in this story? What does half a day actually represent? Which is the title, right? What does school represent in this context? What does the narrator's father represent? All of these things are going to provide us with meaning if we spend some time considering what the author's intentions were behind those. Are they metaphors? Are they symbolic? And what do they really represent? So, good luck with today's assignment. Remember to turn everything in by 5 p.m. And I'll be around to answer any questions you may have with your work today. Okay? Good luck.